The grandeur of the Hadeland Empire had turned to ash in a single night. The flames of rebellion greedily devoured the halls that for centuries had been considered the unshakable stronghold of power, leaving only ruins in their wake. Watching her familiar world crumble, Princess Alessia felt no fear, only a bitter awareness of inevitability. The end toward which the empire had been heading for decades had finally arrived, painting the sky with a crimson glow. She had tried many times to warn her father, pointing out the danger of tampering with the alchemy of homunculi, but her voice had drowned in the indifference of the luxurious halls. The forbidden knowledge that had once granted the monarchy dominance had now become its death sentence. It had all begun with them, beings created solely to serve as tools. Deprived of their own will and rights, homunculi were the perfect weapon. Their minds were bound by magical chains, turning living beings into silent shadows obliged to serve the crown unquestioningly. The empire ruthlessly exploited their strength, throwing them into the bloodiest battles. Behind the mask of striving for peace lay the cruel exploitation of those whom alchemy had endowed with power but stripped of a soul. Even those among them who stood out with talent and intellect remained, in the eyes of the aristocracy, nothing more than expensive possessions. The titles of knights were an empty formality, masking the reality of a golden cage. For the imperial family, they would forever remain slaves who could not and should not have their own self. But when the cup of patience overflowed, a wave of uprising swept through the palace. While the nobility was busy with intrigues, the shadow of the coming catastrophe had already engulfed the throne room. The emperor's weakness and Brigitte's boundless ambitions accelerated the fall. Upon becoming crown princess, Alessia's sister had turned the lives of the empire's defenders into an endless cycle of humiliation and pain. With her coronation, the cruelty toward artificial beings reached its peak. Those who did not end up in the elite units faced death in exhausting labor. The lives of homunculi had been devalued, turned into mere consumables for imperial ambitions. Even the best warriors suffered a shameful fate, they were turned into powerless playthings in the princess's harem. The honor of the knights was trampled, and their dignity destroyed for the whim of a mad ruler. Alessia had seen it all, remaining only a powerless witness to someone else's madness. Brigitte saw her sister only as a threat to her influence. Trying to get rid of her rival, she decided to use a political marriage as a way to banish Alessia to distant lands forever. Such was the bitter fate of princesses deprived of power, to become bargaining chips in someone else's game. However, Alessia understood, behind this union lay only her sister's desire to finally erase her from the history of Hadeland. The rebels needed very little time to turn the pride of the monarchy into smoldering ruins. The name of Michael Agneto now sounded like a verdict on the old era. The leader of the rebellion stood amid the flames like the embodiment of retribution itself, come to collect the debts from those who had considered themselves gods for centuries. Once his will had been bound by magic, but his colossal power had allowed him not only to break the chains but to subjugate the will of every homunculus in these lands. He had personally ended the emperor's life, putting a final period in the history of the dynasty. The monarch had believed until his last moment that the chains of slavery were more reliable than any loyalty. The thunder of the empire's fall echoed in the princess's soul only as a hollow, terrifying silence. Of the entire ruling family, only Rosnita had been spared. Michael needed a figure with imperial blood to justify his seizure of power before the people. Watching her sister ready to kneel before her own executioner, Alessia felt a pang of belated regret. She realized, if there was anything worth regretting, it was her own passive waiting for the end. The heavy creak of the door pulled her from her thoughts. The hour of the final meeting had come. Michael entered the chambers with confidence, filling the entire space with his presence. His voice, cold and calm, cut through the silence the princess had so carefully preserved like a verdict. The former slave who had become the empire's greatest warrior now looked at her not from below, but as the rightful master of her life. Every step he took across the expensive carpet shortened the distance between the past and the inevitable. A dangerous spark of excitement flashed in his eyes when he noticed that the princess did not even flinch at his appearance. Alessia did not avert her gaze, silently studying the man who had just destroyed her legacy. The air in the room literally became electrified with unspoken words and mutual tension. He spoke words of concern, but they sounded false, hiding his true purpose for the visit. The princess responded with a caustic remark, questioning his sudden magnanimity. She asked directly whether it wasn't too late for him to remember courtesy after turning the palace into ruins. For a moment, the rebel leader fell silent, carefully studying her face. He seemed to be rediscovering this woman, whose defiance had not faded even in the face of death. Every word of hers was laced with venom and dignity he had not expected. Alessia suggested that he finish what he had started if he had come for her head. She made it clear that she did not need the conqueror's feigned concern, and in this clash of wills, he had for the first time encountered worthy resistance. His silence grew even heavier, and a frightening, almost primal curiosity flickered in his gaze. With one sharp movement, he closed the distance, depriving her of the last remnants of personal space. Speaking her name, he forced the princess to feel the full weight of his presence. There was no longer any shadow of submission in his eyes, only the fury of a man who could finally dictate his terms as an equal. The girl tried to maintain her composure, urging him to say everything that had accumulated in him over the long years of slavery. He was in no hurry, savoring the moment of triumph. His gaze scanned every flutter of her eyelashes, trying to catch even the slightest sign of fear or weakness. And when he finally spoke, his confession sounded quieter but heavier than any order. Michael's words about the choice she had once failed to make made her heart freeze in confusion. The shocking statement amid the slaughter left her momentarily speechless. He claimed that Alessia could have avoided this nightmare if, in her time, she had shown willpower and chosen him as her personal knight. In his voice, there was a hidden resentment for years of being ignored. This reminder awakened in the princess's memory images of the old system she had always considered deeply flawed. According to the customs of the empire, every member of the family could bind a homunculus to themselves, creating bonds of absolute, almost mystical loyalty. But for Alessia, this ritual had always been nothing more than legalized slavery. A personal knight was obliged to fulfill any whim of his master, becoming his shadow and sword. It was a bond that could not be broken until the death of one of them. Behind the gleam of armor lay a grim reality: the empire disposed of homunculi lives without considering them human. Alessia despised this right of ownership, which had earned her the reputation of the strange princess. Her refusal to choose a personal knight had been a silent protest against the system. She did not want to own another's will, even if it left her without personal protection. Rose Nita, however, had no such doubts. Enchanted by Michael's power, she had made him her tool without hesitation, using his strength to strengthen her own influence. Now Alessia understood, Michael had skillfully used her sister's feelings to get close to the very heart of the empire. Gathering her strength, the princess asked directly whether he truly believed she should have become his mistress just to save herself. Her bitter smile emphasized the absurdity of his suggestion. Salvation at the cost of participating in oppression had never been an option for her. She delivered her verdict: Michael had never wanted her for herself. All he needed was a convenient screen in the form of an obedient princess so he could rule the country while remaining in the shadow of her title. The ensuing silence confirmed her point. He did not deny the obvious, and his gaze grew even colder. Instead of anger, a shadow of respect flickered across Michael's face. He admitted that he had underestimated Alessia's perceptiveness, which had allowed her to see the true motives behind his words. The tense scene was interrupted by the sudden appearance of guards, whose news instantly changed the atmosphere in the room. The report about the Empress's condition and strange deviations made the rebel leader immediately shift his priorities. His attention switched to a new and far more serious problem. Focus flashed in his eyes, and his plans for the evening were definitively ruined. Michael left the room as abruptly as he had entered. The affairs of the conquered empire demanded his personal presence, leaving no time for prolonged dialogues. His final promise of a new meeting hung in the air like an invisible threat. He departed, leaving the princess in the grip of uncertainty. Left alone, Alessia felt the fear she had been holding back all this time slowly rising to her throat. She understood that this postponement was only an illusion, and the sentence had already been signed. She clenched her hands until it hurt, trying to realize how much time she had left until dawn. The silence of the palace now seemed ominous to her. Every rustle behind the door made her heart beat faster in anticipation of the executioners. Soon the silence was broken by the sound of approaching footsteps. That light and confident rhythm was all too familiar to her. Her sister's mocking greeting cut through the air, making Alessia tense up. Rose Nita appeared before her in the radiance of her new status. She looked triumphant, paying no attention to the tragedy of their family, completely absorbed in her own happiness and power. Alessia looked at her sister with unconcealed horror. Rose Nita seemed to live in a different world, where the blood on the walls was merely background for her personal triumph. The main revelation was her sister's pregnancy. Rose Nita proudly declared that she was carrying Michael's heir beneath her heart, the one who would secure the new dynasty of homunculi on the throne. This news plunged Alessia into shock. All the laws of alchemy stated that homunculi were sterile. Her sister's claim went against the very nature of artificial beings. Rosenita's mockery only confirmed the seriousness of the situation. She reveled in her superiority, seeing complete bewilderment in Alessia's eyes. The realization of the scale of the changes paralyzed the princess's will. If Michael had truly managed to overcome the limitations of his nature, then the empire faced a future that was impossible to even imagine. Rose Nita leaned closer, and her voice, stripped of its former false softness, rang with frightening directness. She sincerely believed she was sharing the greatest mystery, unaware that her words sounded like a death sentence for the entire familiar world order. Her palms reverently traced the contours of her belly. A whisper about the power of the philosopher's stone, capable of creating the unthinkable, filled the room. This child, in her firm conviction, was the fruit of their insane union, living proof of magic's victory over the laws of nature itself. The news that Sir Agnito had gone in search of Alessia and that they had likely missed each other was met only with the princess's detached gaze. Rosenita's cold palms gripped her sister's hands in a deathly hold. Her eyes begged for understanding as she confessed that she had been beside herself with anxiety upon hearing the terrible news. Alessia's execution had been scheduled for today. The world around Alessia finally collapsed. Time had run out, and the sentence had been signed. Just as I thought, it will happen today, Rose Nita pronounced this with frightening solemnity, savoring every word. Her sympathy carried an icy certainty that sent chills down the spine, while Alessia only lowered her head further, hiding her gaze from this madness. A mysterious smile touched her lips as she asked whether Alessia knew the fate of their father and the rest of their brothers and sisters. Rosenita's eyes sparkled with fanatical brilliance. Clasping her hands at her chest in a gesture of feigned piety, she reminded her that the rebel people had found the most suitable executioner for each member of the imperial family. Against the blood-red background, an image of sophisticated torture came to life, becoming the highest act of retribution. Members of the dynasty were forced to meet death at the hands of those they trusted most, their own loyal knights who had sworn oaths upon their swords. This mercy from Michael seemed especially monstrous. Allowing those who hated you to put the final period in your story was the height of cruelty. The poisonous stream of words continued to flow. Horror gripped the mind at the thought of Bridget, burned alive in her own home. Justice in this world was always wrapped in the packaging of cruelty, and her castle had turned to ash along with her ambitions. The description of nightmares continued with frightening calm. Rose Nita was convinced that Alessia dreamed of a quick and painless death on the guillotine, hoping for a merciful strike of steel. But, little sister, you look so frightened. The triumphant smile on Rosenita's lips grew even wider. The awareness of the inevitable froze in Alessia's eyes. The news that the homunculus chosen to escort her to the scaffold was not some random soldier sounded like the final chord. Rosenita's gaze was full of venom and glee. She emphasized that they had found the one person who desired Alessia's death more than anyone else in the entire empire. Michael Agnito. The one who had once been only the princess's shadow now towered over her fate. He stood before her, the embodiment of absolute power and boundless hatred, ready to personally sever the thread of her pathetic life and place the final period in the history of the Headland dynasty. Every word from Rosnita pierced the silence of the room like a sharp blade. The news that the executioner had already been chosen became the final stroke in the picture of inevitable collapse, turning Alessia's last hours of life into a sophisticated torture. Michael Agnito. The one who had once been nothing more than an obedient shadow of the throne now towered over the princess's fate. His cold, piercing gaze left no doubt, he had personally volunteered to witness her final breath, driven by a thirst for long-awaited vengeance. The realization that he would be the one to guide her into oblivion paralyzed her will. Had such a bottomless abyss of rage always hidden behind that mask of indifference? The absence of a loyal knight had made her an easy target for contempt. In Michael's eyes, she was merely a weak link in the fading dynasty, a useless burden whose hatred he no longer saw any need to conceal. Rosnita only confirmed these bitter thoughts, reveling in every moment of her sister's despair. Triumph rang in her voice, thinly disguised as false grief for her doomed sister. Her fingers slowly slipped into the folds of her expensive fabric and drew out something meant to put a final end to the story. The description of the upcoming execution flowed from her lips in a poisonous stream. Alessia begged for silence, but Rosnita had no intention of depriving herself of the pleasure of painting this nightmare down to the smallest detail. With frightening enthusiasm, she spoke of the glint of the guillotine. Tales of the bloody fall of House Headland, whose executions had always been marked by primal cruelty, filled the room with icy horror. The pallor of Alessia's face became almost deathly. The time for hope had run out forever, leaving only cold sweat on her forehead. The image of the dull blade delivering strike after strike came alive in her imagination. Rosnita savored the details of the agonizing departure, where death would come only after a long and humiliating struggle. The sight of her broken sister only fueled her enthusiasm. Gently wrapping an arm around the victim's shoulders, she promised salvation that was, in reality, merely another form of ending. A calculating predatory gleam shone in her eyes. With the grace worthy of a court ball, she held out a vial to her sister, its contents worth more than any gold. Belladonna poison, the only way to avoid the shame and pain of the scaffold while preserving the phantom remnants of former dignity. The serpent tempter in the form of a princess whispered about the mercy of a voluntary departure. Death here and now seemed far more tempting than a bloody spectacle in the square. The cold glass of the vial burned her fingers. Alessia stared at it, understanding that this was her final choice in a life she was still desperately, against all logic, trying to cling to. A quiet sigh escaped her lips, more like the rasp of a corpse that had already accepted its fate. Bitter apologies for the weight of this moment weighed upon her shoulders, though she bore no guilt for it. The decision she made filled her with a strange, empty resolve. She was ready to take responsibility for this ending, if only to spare the others from the consequences of her departure. A triumphant smile bloomed on Rosnita's face. Her plan had worked perfectly. The victim had accepted her fate from her own hands. The final words of farewell hung in the cold air. The princess hoped that her departure would mark the end of this nightmarish chapter, and that her sister could find peace in the world they had once called their own. But Rosnita was in no hurry to leave. She froze, as if waiting for the long-awaited performance to begin. Alessia's gaze was filled with a silent question. She did not understand why her sister was lingering or why the feigned sorrow had vanished from her eyes in an instant. Rosnita's iron grip on her wrist left no way back. She whispered insidiously that she could not leave her sister in her final moments. Someone had to witness the end of the once great dynasty. A horrifying smile lit up Rosnita's face. Among the bright flowers, she looked like a beautiful yet deadly vision, thirsting to see the agony of the one she had so carefully led to the edge. There was no turning back. Trembling fingers brought the fateful vial to her lips. Rosnita's insistent whisper urged her to act faster. This was not mercy, but an order wrapped in the silk of false care, before the victim could change her mind at the very last moment. In her single visible eye, the fire of mad triumph flared. The bitter liquid burned her throat. Alessia closed her eyes, accepting her fate, while drops of poison like black tears trickled down her chin, staining her once majestic dress. Darkness slowly began to cloud her vision. The last glimmer of light in the princess's eyes faded, giving way to the icy calm of oblivion. Her fingers loosened, and the empty vial fell to the floor with a clatter. Rosnita watched with bated breath, not missing a single gasp from her victim. The final swallow of belladonna put an end to her earthly journey. A strange lightness pierced her entire body, heralding a swift release from pain, betrayal, and the constant fear that had haunted her for so many years. Life was leaving her body. Her powerless hand fell onto the upholstery of the sofa like a broken bird's wing that had never managed to take flight. The outlines of the room blurred and dissolved. The world around her became ghostly and utterly unimportant. Rosenita's final whisper about the meaning of the belladonna flowers sounded like a curse. This was not a gift of forgiveness, it was a final insult from the one to whom Alessia had entrusted her death. She lay among the bright buds, whose beauty now seemed like a mockery of the silence of death. Alessia Hadeland, the princess without a knight, had finally found her ending, enveloped in the scent of poison and false tears. The silence of the room was broken only by Rosenita's greedy gaze fixed on her sister's pale face. She searched for confirmation of her complete and final victory, never taking her eyes off the motionless body. A laugh like the sound of shattered crystal tore through the silence. Now no obstacles remained in her path, no past, no obligations, only the throne and her own madness. She leaned down to the dead woman's ear and silently thanked her for this voluntary and perfectly timed departure. Rosnita left her sister's body alone with the cold emptiness of the room. The performance was over, the scenery burned, and a new life awaited her, built upon the ruins of her own family. A pouring rain enveloped the castle in a grey shroud, as if mourning the events of that night. The stormy sky became the backdrop for the tragedy that had unfolded in the imperial chambers. Michael's arrival was sharp and swift. His gaze, heavy with foreboding, darted around the room in search of answers to the silent question of what had happened here. A scene of frozen silence met his eyes. Alessia lying motionless on the sofa and Rosnita, whose figure seemed the embodiment of grief, created a terrifying contrast with his recent plans. Beneath the mask of the cold night, despair broke through. He touched her face, as if hoping it was only a prolonged dream. Michael's anger flared with new force. He demanded immediate explanations, unable to accept that Alessia's fate had been decided without his involvement. Rosenita's answer was icy and concise. She declared her sister's suicide as the final act of responsibility toward imperial blood. Suspicion froze in the knight's gaze. He could not believe that Alessia had taken such a step on her own and searched Rosenita's eyes for even a trace of truth. A direct accusation hung in the air. The question of whether Rosnita had been the one to give her sister the poison became the point of no return in their fragile alliance. Rosnita did not even try to justify herself. Her admission of helping her sister sounded with defiant calm, turning the act of murder into a gesture of mercy. She emphasized that Michael, as her partner in the conspiracy, should have expected such an outcome. Alessia's death was merely the logical conclusion of their shared path. Poison seeped through her words. She insisted that a living member of the imperial family would always be a seed for future disasters, and now that threat had finally been eliminated. Michael's patience snapped. His command for Rosnita to be silent was filled with such fury that even the princess froze for a moment. The knight's reaction caused genuine bewilderment in Rosnita. She could not understand why her action had provoked such anger in a man who himself had wished for the downfall of this dynasty. Without another word, Michael lifted Alessia's limp body into his arms. His determination to carry her away from here was more eloquent than any justification. Rosenita's indignation turned into open protest. She could not allow herself to be ignored, especially at a moment when their common goals seemed achieved. The question of how he dared ignore his partner rang out as the final chord in the scene. The crack in their alliance had become an insurmountable chasm. Michael no longer wished to listen. With one short, icy command, he cut off all of Rosenita's attempts to continue the pointless argument. The princess was not used to such treatment. Rage overwhelmed her when mere servants dared to touch her arms, blocking her path to the slipping goal. Seeing that Michael was truly leaving, Rosenita burst into a scream. For the last time, she tried to appeal to his reason, demanding respect for her status and their common cause. But the next words from Rosenita made time stop. The confession that was supposed to be her ultimate trump card. Staring at the knight's back, she spat out the phrase that would change everything: "I am carrying your child." Triumph shone in her eyes, the triumph of a woman certain of her victory. She gently touched her belly, as if this fragile proof of their bond could instantly restore her control over the situation. Instead of the expected shock or tenderness, a frightening, almost pitying smirk slid across Michael's face. For a moment, the princess was at a loss. She did not understand why he was not rushing to her, why there was nothing in his gaze but icy contempt. He knew the truth she refused to acknowledge. The child she carried was not the fruit of love, but the result of a dark and dangerous experiment. Ancient alchemical seed implanted in her womb for the sake of power and control over imperial blood. A true monster hidden behind the mask of life. The very existence of this fetus did not change Michael's decision. On the contrary, it only highlighted how far Rosenita had gone in her madness. He did not even consider this being his. To him, it was merely a thing, a foreign object whose purpose remained a mystery. "It is far too presumptuous to call this a child," his words sounded like a death sentence to all of Rosenita's hopes for their shared future. The question remained open: what would this creation become? A human inheriting its mother's sins, or a monster born of alchemy? Rosenita froze, stunned by the cruelty of his words. In that moment, she realized, she had lost him forever. Michael did not even turn at her screams. The cold order to take the princess away sounded like a verdict, finally erasing her importance in his eyes. She thrashed in the grip of the guards, unable to believe that her plan, the plan that was supposed to bind him to her forever, had ended in ruin. "Who is she to you?" This question, full of venom and despair, hung in the cold air of the corridor. It was not so much guilt that tormented her as unbearable jealousy toward the one who was already dead. Every step carried him further away from the palace intrigues, plunging him into the oppressive silence of his own choice. Looking at the princess's pale face, Michael realized a bitter truth. She had never asked him to be by her side, but now he could not let her go. There was no passion in this closeness, only a quiet, painful devotion from a man who had realized the value of what he had lost too late. His gaze changed. There were no more doubts in it, only a frightening resolve. A short order to the chancellor marked the beginning of a new chapter. He was ready to use every resource of the empire for a single purpose. The price did not matter. If saving her required summoning every mage and alchemist on the continent, he would do it without hesitation. In the fading light of day, an oath was spoken that became the meaning of his life. He would bring her back from the embrace of death, no matter the cost. The seventh princess of the empire, Evian-Rose Chloe Hadelamid. Within the palace walls, her name was spoken with contempt, but among the homunculi she was a legend, the only ray of hope in their bleak existence. She was the only one who had dared to defy centuries-old traditions. Her demand to reform the homunculus system sounded like open rebellion to the imperial family. The ugly duckling of the imperial palace, that was what they called her behind her back. Yet it was precisely this detachment and her refusal to follow the empire's cruel customs that made her figure so attractive to those deprived of rights. No homunculus could pass by without holding their breath. Her mercy was too rare a gift in this cold world. Hundreds of homunculi dreamed of becoming her personal knight, of protecting the one who protected them. But the princess remained adamant, she did not want to turn a living being into her shadow. Looking at her proud silhouette, Michael had forced himself to abandon that dream. He understood that her harshness was merely a way to spare them from even greater pain. And yet, he could not make himself look away. Watching her had become his secret ritual, his only connection to the woman who was destroying all the foundations of the empire for the sake of justice. Contempt and injustice rained down on her from all sides. The brighter her compassion shone, the denser the shadows around her grew, turning the princess's life into an endless struggle for survival. To see her humiliated and remain on the sidelines was beyond his strength. Every insult directed at her echoed in his heart with a dull, uncontrollable rage. He had always considered himself an emotionless tool. But the realization that he was ready to do anything for her became the most terrifying discovery of his life. Never before had his iron self-control cracked so deeply. That day he understood, his fate was forever intertwined with the fate of this disgraced princess. When he came to his senses, it was already too late. He found himself trapped by his own desire, unable to tear his gaze away from the princess who seemed to him the only living being in this dead palace. Between the imperial family and the homunculi lay an abyss that could never be crossed. But for him, that abyss had become a place of his own voluntary imprisonment. A relationship that could never exist according to the laws of fate. He knew it, yet the more often he saw her, the stronger grew his desire to break the very nature of things. Rumors of the seventh princess's imminent wedding spread through the garden like poisonous whispers. A political marriage, more like the sale of goods to a distant kingdom, struck him like a blow to the gut. He listened to the laughter of the aristocrats and understood, they looked at his goddess as if she were an object. The silent scream inside him grew louder and louder until it turned into icy certainty. No. He would not allow it to happen. His fingers clenched the hilt of his sword until it hurt, and his mind finally rejected the obedience imposed by the blood magic. The fate assigned to her by this rotten lineage meant nothing. A violet fire ignited in his eyes, the fire of rebellion that could not be extinguished. Such a fate, he could simply destroy it. With one movement of his hand, with one swing of his blade. And he did it. He overthrew the great dynasty, turning the empire's glory into ash and ruins. The castle that had once been her prison now blazed in the flames of his mad devotion. At last. Amid the chaos and death, there was no one left who could stand between them. Now the path to his princess was completely clear. All he wanted was simply to be near her. To guard her peace, to hear her voice, and to see that faint smile that was dearer to him than all the treasures of the empire. He believed that by becoming stronger, he would be able to shield her from any misfortune. That his loyalty would become an impenetrable shield against the poison of palace intrigues. That's what I thought, the bitter awareness of his own weakness cut like a knife. At that moment, he still did not know that fate was already preparing its cruelest blow, one against which even the magic of blood was powerless. A story of love born from betrayal, and of devotion that crossed the boundaries of death itself. The Philosopher's Stone. The forbidden artifact, pulsing with crimson light, became the last hope for the one who had lost everything. Its magic demanded an exorbitant price, but Michael was no longer afraid of it. In the shadow of the monumental crystal, he seemed like nothing more than a ghost of his former self. Time in this hall had frozen, saturated with the scent of incense and the chill of the grave. For days had passed. For endless days during which he had not closed his eyes or touched food, guarding the peace of the one whose heart no longer beat beneath his palm. The appearance of the servant only intensified the oppressive atmosphere. News of state affairs seemed to Michael like empty noise, unworthy of attention. The chancellor tried to appeal to his reason, reminding him of the recently seized throne. But why did he need the crown of an empire that no longer held her laughter? Why did he need power over a world that had become an empty stage set? It is impossible to bring someone back from the dead, those words sounded like a verdict. Yet in Michael's clouded mind, a plan was already ripening, one that challenged the very laws of nature. If the legends about the miracles of the Philosopher's Stone were true, he would make them reality. No matter the cost to himself, or to anyone else. The Emperor's voice sounded frighteningly ordinary. To activate the stone, royal blood was needed, the final piece in his terrible mosaic of salvation. The order to execute Rose Nita, the last surviving member of the family, shocked the servant. Only yesterday she had been the key to power, and today she was nothing more than fuel for alchemy. Why should I keep her alive? Hatred for the entire world seeped through that question. For Michael, there was no longer any morality, only one single goal. Ivy is already dead. This cry of despair echoed through the hall. He was ready to sacrifice anyone and anything, as long as that pale skin warmed beneath his fingers once again. He no longer cared about the fate of the empire. All the grandeur of the throne and the mystical power of the stone had lost their value the moment the silence in this room became final. The tense anticipation in the palace corridors was interrupted by sudden news that made the chancellor flinch. A short whisper brought word of a guest whose visit had not been summoned, yet was desperately needed. The sage from the fir forest appeared before the emperor like a shadow stepped out of ancient pages. His arrival was the last hope for the one who was already prepared to burn the world to the ground. Michael did not turn around. His voice sounded dull and commanding. He knew why the old man had come, and there was only one question: did he truly possess the power to bring Ivy back? The guest's answer offered no comfort. Raising the dead was only a dangerous illusion, for the returned body would forever remain an empty shell, deprived of the spark of life and its former soul. The connection between the soul and the flesh of the seventh princess had been severed forever. Neither magic nor forbidden alchemical rituals could mend what death itself had divided for eternity. The sage's words sounded like a final verdict, echoing off the cold walls of the empty hall. Irritation flared up in him with renewed force. Another charlatan who dared waste his time on obvious truths he did not wish to hear. But before Michael's anger could turn into an order for execution, the old man spoke again. Instead of impossible resurrection, the sage offered a mad alternative: to turn back time itself, rewinding the moments to that fateful hour when everything had gone to ruin. The silence in the hall became tangible. Was it possible to correct the past without destroying the present? The emperor's gaze changed. Icy despair gave way to the fanatical gleam of a man who had found a loophole in the laws of the universe. Yet the price for salvation was exorbitantly high. To reverse the course of history, Michael would have to sacrifice half the power of the philosopher's stone, a price he would pay without hesitation. For, the name slipped from his lips in a quiet groan, containing more pain than all the battles of the empire. He looked at her as if trying to force her lungs to draw breath again through the power of his gaze alone. The price no longer mattered. The throne, glory, time itself, the emperor was ready to throw everything into the flames of alchemy, if only to break this unbearable silence. Having received consent, the sage bowed his head. The mechanism of fate, which had stopped 4 days earlier, began to move once again. The hall filled with the resonant echo of ancient incantations. Before the enormous pulsing crystal, on an altar of cold stone, lay the one for whom the laws of this world would today be erased and rewritten anew. "Ah, your majesty, I forgot to mention one detail," the old man's voice sounded insinuating, instantly chilling the air in the hall. "The philosopher's stone requires a blood anchor, and the axis of this temporal leap would not be the emperor himself, but the seventh princess. She was the epicenter of the storm, the one around whom the gears of the past would turn." The realization settled heavily on Michael's shoulders. It meant only one thing. Only she would retain the memory of this nightmare. Only her consciousness would carry the pain of this loss through the ages, while the rest of the world, including himself, would simply forget what had happened. "So I won't meet her," the bitter thought broke off mid-sentence. He was condemning himself to oblivion, and her to the eternal knowledge of a truth that could not be shared. But she would see him again. Alive, not yet having made his greatest mistakes, still capable of looking at the world without hatred in his eyes. That was enough for him to step into the abyss. "Yes, exactly so," the old man confirmed, and the light of the stone became blinding, swallowing the outlines of the throne room. But would this knowledge not become a new curse for her? Would she not choose a different path, frightened by the monster he had once become? Fear gripped his heart. What if in that new life she looked at him and saw only a tyrant? What if he made the wrong choice again, and the cycle of suffering closed forever. Who knows, the sage's whisper was the last thing Michael heard in this reality. The final touch. His fingers barely felt the cold of her skin, lingering in a silent farewell before the world around them began to collapse. It doesn't matter, he threw into the empty hall. His figure remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the one for whom he was ready to erase reality itself. The sage raised his hand, calling upon the power of the giant crystal. The ancient pages of the book fluttered from the streams of energy emanating from the pulsing scarlet stone. The glow spread across the stone slabs, filling every corner of the enormous hall. In the very heart of this light, the fate of the empire and two tormented souls was being decided. Their figures stood frozen, separated by an invisible line. The resolve in his eyes met the serene calm of her eternal sleep. A step forward, into the very heart of the blinding haze where the ground vanished from beneath his feet. "For," he whispered, burying his face in the gold of her hair. In this final embrace lay the full weight of all the words he had never managed to say. "Whether you kill me or choose me again, I will accept any outcome." His lips almost touched hers as the light finally swallowed their features.